Well, good morning, everyone. Good afternoon or good evening for some of the people joining us online, and a very warm welcome to all of you. My name's Louise Sanger. I'm Head of Research, Interpretation and Engagement at the Lloyd's Register Foundation. It's wonderful to see so many familiar faces here, and also equally lovely to welcome new colleagues who are joining us for the first time. Before we begin properly, I've got a little bit of housekeeping to run through, so if you just bear with me on that. It is a hybrid event, so hello again to everyone joining us online from all around the world. We'll be recording the sessions, so please do let myself or colleagues know if you prefer not to be featured in that. We're also hoping to take photographs through the day, so if anyone wants to take photographs, we're very happy with that. But again, if you don't want to be featured in those, please just quietly come and see us, and we'll make sure that we don't include you. In terms of emergency evacuations, there isn't meant to be a fire alarm test today, so if you do hear the alarm, it is a genuine one. Please follow all the instructions from members of staff and from the security team, and don't attempt to re-enter the building. We also ask that people don't use the lift in the event of an emergency. And if you need assistance during an emergency, just make yourself known to one of the colleagues. We have toilet facilities just outside this door, off to the right, and then again in the same location downstairs. So if I can ask you all to switch your phones to vibrate and enjoy the day, I shall continue with my introduction. So for anyone joining us online, please do feel free to let us know where you're joining from. And if you've got any questions or comments throughout the day, just share those online and we'll feed them back to the room as appropriate. So today's event sits within the wider Rewriting Women into Maritime History programme. And I want to take a moment to say why this work matters. Not only historically, but for the future of diversity, equity and inclusion in maritime life. It's especially fitting that we're gathering in the context of the International Maritime Organisation's International Day for Women in Maritime, marked each year on the 18th of May. And I know some of you were at some of the events at the IMO and all around London and other places yesterday. The IMO established this day to recognise and raise the profile of women working across the global maritime sector, to promote their recruitment, their retention and their long-term participation and well-being at all levels of the industry and governance. It's an important moment of international recognition, and one that reminds us why sustained, evidence-based work like this matters beyond a single day in the calendar. So rewriting women into maritime starts with a simple but powerful idea. If people are missing from our histories, they're more easily excluded from our futures. Maritime is a vast global system undergoing rapid changes, driven by new technologies, by decarbonisation, digitalisation and new ways of working. But none of that transformation happens without people. The human factor's always been central to maritime life, and it will become even more important as the sector evolves. So by capturing women's experiences, past and present, the Rewriting Women into Maritime initiative helps to make visible the skills, the labour, the resilience that have long sustained maritime communities, but have too often gone unrecognised. Visibility is not symbolic. It shapes who feels they belong, whose voices are heard, and whose expertise is valued. In that sense, history becomes a tool, not for nostalgia, but for learning, reflection, and positive change. Rewriting in forgotten or unheard voices strengthens the basis for a more inclusive maritime culture by ensuring that women's experiences are recorded, shared, and taken seriously across different roles, geographies, and generations. It's important to say this work's not about women in isolation. Real progress in diversity, equity, and inclusion happens through collaboration. The initiatives benefited enormously from the support of male allies as researchers, advocates, colleagues, funders, leaders and listeners who recognise that a fairer, safer and more inclusive maritime sector is better for everyone. So I want to offer a sincere thank you to all those allies in the room and beyond. Your engagement matters. Change is strongest when responsibility is shared. The initiative also is not about excluding or overwriting others in the industry or undermining the importance of the work of men across the sector, but instead it aims to rebalance the narrative to ensure that everyone has a place and everyone can be heard. Finally, I want to thank you all for being here, for giving your time, your attention and your interest. By gathering to discuss these histories and the present-day challenges, you're already contributing to the future that we're trying to build. I hope the event sparks conversation, reflection, connection, and reminds us that the stories we choose to tell shape the future that we make possible. In the ground hall downstairs, there are some of the panels from our She Sees exhibition, which is building the attention around the world for the initiative. You can also see that in Portsmouth until the end of the year, the full thing. And downstairs in the old library, we're hosting a guest exhibition called The Mariners, Race, Religion and Empire in British Ports from 1801 through to 1914. The project was developed by the University of Bristol. It explores lives and relationships of sailors with religion, gender and race in 4 key parts of the United Kingdom. So please do take time to enjoy the exhibition on the ground floor throughout the day. So thank you very much for listening, and I'm delighted to get us started. I will welcome and hand over to Claudine Sharp-Patel in a moment. I'll just see if I've got the agenda slide first to give you a little overview of the day. So we're going to follow on from Claudine with a keynote as well on global perspectives and a keynote also from Dr. Jo Stanley, and then we'll move into one of our panel sessions. And hopefully you've all got the brochure with the timings for the day, but do pop downstairs if you need a copy. So I'm delighted now to welcome Claudine Sharp-Patel up to the lectern. She's from Lloyd's Register, one of our greatest allies, President-elect of the Institute of Marine Engineers, Science and Technology, an engineer by profession, and an example of how one woman can make such a big difference. Claudine.
So, good morning, everyone. I'm very grateful to be here, and I'm very grateful for the welcoming. I can't actually see my notes here, so I'm going to be winging it, but it should be fine. I'm quite used to that. So, my session is about hands on deck. And just to give you a bit of an understanding, for me, when I started going to sea, I'm that baby. So I started going to sea as a child. It was just a normal thing. My father went to sea, his father, etc., for generations. In fact, we go back to about 1523 in the Shetlands, where all the men went to sea. So for me, it was not unusual. And in fact, this is where I grew up, in Papua New Guinea. So again, a seagoing nation, there isn't anything but canoes and going to sea. You lived on the ocean. It's what sustained you. So to begin with, this is my experience. I didn't have any other experience other than this until I started going to sea. And as a marine engineer, I went to college and it was 2% female population in the college itself. And then when I went to sea on the Australian coast, there was 2% population. We had a fabulous conversation last night talking about sexual harassment and discrimination. And I know, especially in the Australian coast, there was a lot of assaults and harassment, and a lot of women who started definitely didn't stay. But I was one of those tenacious, challenging people who didn't say no. It took me a little while to build up and have that, but this is me as I went through my career. And for me as an engineer, it set the whole part of who I was. It made me understand what I wanted to do, how I wanted to develop, and how I wanted to be in the future. And it was always an engineer. I knew I couldn't be at sea for my entire life, so I did an MBA in shipping and legislation and logistics. But it made me understand both sides of the story. This is in Gore Bay in Sydney, and this is a terminal right in the middle of Sydney. If you look closer, you can see in the background the Harbour Bridge. So I've been really honoured to be in a lot of different areas and a lot of experience. This is me as my first trip as chief engineer. I picked up a ship in Japan and we sailed from Japan down to the South Pacific. It's a bit of a rust bucket, but it was one I would never say no to. What that has created, though, is an understanding that no matter what sort of role models you have, you need to have leaders, and you need to have leaders who take a stance. When I became the first chief engineer in Australia, and then the first with a combined ticket in the world that IMRS and AMSA at the time knew about, it wasn't about breaking the mould, because I didn't know there was a mould to break, because I grew up with seafarers. I didn't know that there was something I had to achieve. And it was just a fact. I had all these naysays, but I refused to let them beat me. I grew up with a bunch of brothers, so you never let your brothers win. So it was one of those things that I always took to heart. But my biggest learning experience was not when I became an engineer, is when I actually had to use this and use it as a tool to understand other scenarios. My biggest learning experience was Arena, which is a vessel that went aground in New Zealand. This is what she started with. This is what she ended up. And over the 6 months period that I was in charge of the operations for salvage of the container and debris recovery, this spread everywhere. And it meant that I had to use skills that I learnt at sea about teamwork, about leadership, creating that capability, understanding how to work with different people, find solutions. So it wasn't just an engineer. And it still stands, for me, the biggest learning curve, because anyone can be an engineer. But as soon as you actually use that and make a difference, that's where you have the biggest impact. But I digress. So engineer at sea, engineer ashore on terminals, engineer offshore. This is the Prelude, which is a floating FLNG off Western Australia. But although these are wonderful feathers in my cap, it hasn't allowed me to make the changes I wanted to make. This year, I've been, after being with IMRS since the mid-90s, I was elected as president-elect for Institute Marine Engineers, Science and Technologists. And you'll see there Deborah in the middle. She's the first in the recent one. Our last one was Jane Small, and she's a scientist. But this is the first time we've had consecutive presidents. And the Institute's about 150 years old. And I will be the first female marine engineer. Now, does that mean that I have any extra influence? It doesn't. But what it does, I hope, will create a space for a discussion. How can we take this further? We can't encourage people to go to sea. We can't encourage statutory changes to support our women at sea, whether it's mental health, whether it's physical stability, whatever we need. We can't do it unless we understand that actually, as females in this industry, we come to it with a different mentality. We come to it with a different challenge. I'm lucky enough that my husband's a stay-at-home father. And the amount of people that when I say I'm lucky enough, it's kind of like, oh yes, you are. But turn it on your head. If I was a male and he was female staying at home with the kids, there wouldn't be any luck. It would just be the expectation. So for me, even my internal dialogue has to change, because as an industry, when I speak to some of the amazing women at sea, now their problem is they've got family at home, and how are they managing those contracts? Because there is no longevity in a lot of those contracts, because they're casual, because they want to balance family life and a career. This is just a few weeks ago, and you'll see Deborah and myself with the past president standing next to us and the other heads of IMRS. And at the dinner, as much as I tried to push for even the Lloyd's Registers table was 60% female, even at the dinner, which is an industry dinner, it was very low on female population. But I digress. My stance here is to try and change the dialogue. It's not one or the other. It's not a career of motherhood. It's not being an engineer. It's not going to sea. Why can't we have it all? And in fact, I'm lucky because in the 150 years of having dinners at the IMRS, I took my daughter. And the poor dinner speaker went, oh, I have to watch what I say because I understand there's a 10-year-old, well, 11 by the time we finished, And I said, no, she's an Aussie. You can say whatever you want. She expletives aren't an issue for her. But why can't we do this? And my poor daughter gets dragged everywhere, because as far as I'm concerned, if I'm stuck here, then she might as well come with me, and she gets to see the other side, or the glamorous side. So what are we here for? We're here to understand where we are in the industry. We're here to understand a lot of work has been done through IMO, WISTA, Lloyd's Register, and these are just a few summary of the statistics that we're faced in the industry. We're still looking at about 2% women at sea. We're still looking at STEM courses being underrepresented. And this information is easy to find. And when you look through it, it's quite striking, because when I started in the 90s to where we are now, the needle hasn't shifted very far, which is quite disturbing. Training seafarers should be our priority. And it's not just on the female side. We should be looking at the complete diversity of who we have at sea. In the 90s, I sailed with Sierra Leone, Nigerians, but we don't have that anymore. We need to create space for everyone around the globe, because we do not have enough seafarers. And if we just look at the females, since we're here for Women International Day, there's only, with this, the work that's been done and the solutions, if we don't have the buy-in to begin with, if we cannot create a safe space to have seafarers, we're never going to shift it. I mean, it's 5% of seafarers are women. Okay, it's a bit of an uplift from when I was going through college at 2, but it really hasn't lifted that much in 30-odd years. And then the wider maritime environment. For those who are doing maritime engineering, naval architect, those sorts of amazing engineering studies and courses that support our industry, we're still underrepresented. I remember going through college with a wonderful group of naval architects and maritime engineers, offshore engineers, and for me, they're the ones that I've been closest to. One thing that I'm very proud of within Lloyd's Register, although we haven't got very far, we've shined a light on our own surveyors. So back in 22, we did a bit of a research internally for our female surveyors. And even then, we're looking at our surveyors, our female surveyors, not having access to toilets. They're either locked, or there's none available, or they're in a tank and they know that they cannot urinate, because once they get out of the tank, which is probably about an hour, then they've got to walk an hour to the front where the female toilets are. Then they've got to come back an hour, get into the boiler suit and get changed. That's 3 hours that they need to account just to go urinate. That's a bit of a concern. When I was at sea as well, and it's things you get adjusted to. I didn't have separate change rooms at sea. You know, you change in front of the blokes as you're all just there. But now I know that that's not right, because I know differently. But our own surveyors don't have that. And some of the things that really stood out to me on the comments were things like, privilege is invisible for those who have it. And for me, that's really powerful. Oh, sorry. And this is one of our fabulous surveyors, Joanna Mycroft. She's incredible. But just a bit of a conclusion from the survey, which hasn't changed. And even we, because we don't have influence in a lot of the ports and the shipyards, we're trying to make this change. But a lot of it is around, they don't have access. They're embarrassed to ask for access because, you know, you're all talking to men, I need the key type of thing. There aren't any showers anyway. And then it's more around the fact that it's not in one place. So as a UK-based company, Europe has all these wonderful legislation. This is global. This isn't Asia and, you know, different areas. This is a global problem we got feedback with. Now, for my daughter, which you saw a few slides back, I would love her to join our industry. But all she sees is me. She doesn't see a lot of our other role models. And this is because of this. My technical committees are all men. Whenever I get representation from the industry, there's a token few females, but the majority of them are men. How do we shift that to where we need to be? Because that is what's going to make the biggest change once we get our leadership to do this. And for me, that is a key part of all hands on deck, because it needs all of us to make that change from the top down. Thank you.
That was wonderful, Claude. Thank you. Very insightful. And we'll make lots of time later in the day to follow up with any questions and things that people would like to ask. I'd like to hand over now to LP, who is the president of WISTA International. And thank you very much for being with us here today.
Thank you. Good morning to all. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, I would say. Claudine, I have a speech written, but you said so many things that are very close to our heart as WISTA, and personally, and I can say all of these are true, and even worse in some cases, but we are here to make the change happen. And the longest we talk about it, I think we then realize what the issues are. These small little issues that can really make a huge difference. The moment we have separate, on a vessel, separate washing machines. Can you imagine? Just washing machines. It makes a difference to women on board. It costs nothing. Maybe a bit of space. So I will stop and I will go on to my speech. I'm not a very good speaker when I'm reading, but I have to read because I don't want to forget what I need to do to talk to you about. So, as I said, it's a privilege to be here today and on behalf of WISTA International, especially on a day as important enough as the International Day for Women in Maritime, which is very important to us. It has changed the way people see women in maritime from the moment it was inaugurated a few years ago. This year's theme, From Policy to Practice, Advancing Gender Equality for Maritime Excellence, feels particularly timely and relevant to where our industry stands today and to initiatives such as the Lloyd's Foundation's Rewriting Women into Maritime History project. When we reflect on where we currently are, and you talked about it, we might ask ourselves whether we are moving fast enough from awareness to action, from commitment to measurable change, and from individual progress to systematic transformation. This sits to the heart of WISTA's ambitions. As many of you might know, WISTA exists to connect, support, and empower women across the maritime, trade, and logistics sectors globally. Our ambition goes beyond representation alone. We were working towards the maritime industry where gender equality and diversity are actively embedded as drivers of innovation, resilience, sustainable growth across the sector. Women are supported to access leadership pathways throughout professional development, mentoring, and global networking opportunities. Barriers to participation are identified, very similar to what you just showed on that picture, ensuring fair access to opportunities, progression, recognition at all levels. And here I would like to call for each one of you to challenge the places you go. To challenge when you see an environment full of men. It's not bad to ask a company why don't they send a representative that is female. And if they believe that they are not sufficient enough or they have not reached that professional level where they can represent their company, ask them why they have not educated them within the company to reach that level. Why do men have more opportunities on that? Do they? Is it a matter of capabilities? We know that women in university levels are successful, sometimes more than men. So where is that gap? So, more things we do is collaboration and community across borders, strengthening the industry, enabling shared knowledge, partnerships, and collective progress. In a time of skill shortages and an urgent need to attract the next generation to the maritime industry, we must recognize that its future depends on fully including, empowering, and enabling women to contribute to shaping what comes next. And importantly, that future is defined by the connection between history, present action, and future ambition, working together to drive meaningful and lasting transformation. The Women in Maritime Survey 2024 provide us with an important snapshot of where we stand today. I don't want to mention more because you've already mentioned it, but it has given us a clear picture of where the industry stands. And we understand that the challenge is global and continuous. The findings vary across the regions and the sectors, and several clear themes emerge. First of all, progress is real but uneven. Many organizations are improving gender representation, particularly at entry and mid-level roles. However, leadership progression remains slow and inconsistent. Secondly, structural barriers persist. These include recruitment biases, limited access to senior sponsorship, and workplace cultures that are still adapting to be inclusive for leadership models for women. And third, retention remains crucial. Women are entering the maritime sector, but not always staying or progressing at the same rate as the male counterparts. These tell us that entry is not enough. We must focus on long-term career pathways. At the same time, the data highlights that women are underrepresented. We've seen the numbers, and especially at sea, where it is even less than 2%. It's very much closer to 1%. Yet, on board levels, we have a positive fact. Women are 34% of the positions to the number of companies that were surveyed. And that shows some progress. The message is clear. We are moving forward, but we are not moving fast enough. So I here need to mention something, and I saw Mariana from the IMO that we have done all this work for the survey together. The survey will run again in 2027. We will start making calls from early on this year. And please, wherever you work, if it's a private company, public company, or small, big, one person, do give us the data. Do ask for your employees to submit the data. It's very important to have a clear picture and to finally see if it's true that what people are saying, especially men, that we are progressing and we don't need to do any work anymore. So let's have that proof. So what's next and what does it look like? We must move from intention to accountability. Diversity must be measurable, transparent, and linked to leadership responsibility and not treated as optional or peripheral. Second, we must normalize flexible and modern career pathways. The maritime sector operates globally and continuously. Our talent strategies must reflect that reality. And finally, we must recognize that diversity is not a women's issue. And you also mentioned that, Claude. It is a business issue. It is a resilience issue and a competitiveness issue for the entire maritime ecosystem. WISTA International was founded more than 50 years ago and has grown into the foremost global organization representing diversity and inclusion across the maritime trade and logistics sectors. From the very beginning, collaboration has been at the heart of our work, bringing people together, companies, associations across the industry to support the progression of women and strengthen the sector as a whole. It is this spirit of collaboration that has enabled WISTA to evolve from just a professional network into a recognized voice for change. Through sustained engagement and partnership, WISTA has granted consultative status to the IMO in 2018, and that has enabled us to contribute directly to global regulatory discussions spanning the maritime safety, security, seafarer standards, and environmental protection. That collaborative approach continues to define WISTA's impact today. Last October, we signed an MOU with BIMCO, whose members represent a significant share of the global tonnage worldwide. This partnership reflects a shared commitment to a more sustainable and inclusive maritime industry, and the undertaking that progress is accelerated when organizations work together. The importance of collaboration is also reflected to initiatives designed to create practical change across the sector, like the IMO and WISTA Speakers Maritime Bureau, launched in 2022, where we have a pool of women and experts of the industry that event organizers can reach out and find speakers for their events. So we don't have any more excuses of the problem. They usually say that they cannot find good enough women speakers. There are more than 500 women registered there now. And as WISTA is growing, we also we were granted, I would say, the observer status at UNCTAD in 2023, enable us for participation in intergovernmental meetings and contribution to the annual review of the maritime transport. And alongside this, another very close to my heart, and I think to WISTA's heart and the IMO's heart initiative, was the IMO WMU WISTA Women Leadership and Empowerment Program. I said it correct. I'm very bad at titles, I have to tell you. We launched this last year in partnership with the World Maritime University in an effort to help develop confident and capable leaders throughout a blending learning approach that combines academic insight and real industry application. And we made the step forward this year to include men into this course because we believe engaging everyone together is really important for change. It's not good enough to talk just amongst ourselves. Most of us do know the issues here, but we need to be strong and to engage others to this path. Research continues to show that organizations which prioritize diversity and inclusion are more likely to attract and retain the best talent. At the same time, the increasing use of digital technologies across shipping offers an additional opportunity, helping to reshape roles, broaden access, and create new pathways into the industry. And don't miss this second chance for women. We've lost it before. It is a new chance now that we are reshaping the industry to include women everywhere. Taken together, this initiative reflects a consistent direction of travel, increasing visibility, building capability, and strengthening the conditions for women to progress and lead across the maritime. And this brings me to Rewriting Women into Maritime History project. At the first glance, this might appear to be a historical exercise, but in reality, it is deeply connected to our present and future. Maritime history has often been told through a narrow lens, focused on ships, trade routes, and predominantly male leadership. Yet women have always been part of the history, even when they were not formally recognized within it. Women are present in essential but often unseen ways, supporting businesses, maintaining households and communities, and sustaining economic and social continuities while others were at sea. And I say that as I'm Greek and I come from a very maritime country, as the UK is as well. And I think we've all lived that into our course. We've known how it has been and how women supported and stayed strong while the men were away, although I hate this example because it's not real work, it was not a paid work for a woman, and this is what we need to reshape and change. So, women, during periods of wars, very similar to like the Second World War, when men were recruited for their services, women stepped into roles across ports, logistics, administrations, and industry support functions. They did it so effectively, responsively, and with commitment, often without long-term recognition. I will stop because I have 2 more minutes, but I have to end. This pattern matters. Women are frequently the second choice, yet consistently demonstrated capability when given the opportunity. Rewriting Women in Maritime History is about restoring visibility, not rewriting facts, but restoring balance. Because when women see themselves in the history of the industry, then they are more likely to see themselves in the future. This initiative, therefore, supports a wider cultural shift. And I will not say the rest, I will just say, because they're telling me I'm finished. So, we stand at the moment of the history where data and ambition are aligned. The challenge now is execution. Thank you very much. Thank you for listening to me.
Thank you very much, LP. Really insightful as ever. And I've made so many notes already for the closing remarks. We might be here all day. So I'd like to invite Dr. Jo Stanley to come up now. You can take a seat or stand here, whichever you're comfortable with. Great.
I'm going to divert from what I was going to say how absolutely fantastic it is to be here today with all these women who've been working on, and men, sorry chaps, who have been working on women in maritime for so long. I've been at it for over 40 years, and some of you I know very well for almost all that time, and some of you I know very recently. Some of you I know remotely, some of you I don't know at all. Can I just check that the mic is at the right height for me? Yeah, thanks. I particularly want to say hello to all the people who are watching remotely. What a pity you can't be here to experience this wonderful atmosphere and the chance to network in this site of such importance, including negative importance, in women's maritime history. You know, there has not been enough support, as so many speakers have said. And we are progressing, and I wish it was more consistent. So that first screen just says a little bit about who I am, and I've been very honored to be a consultant on the Rewriting Women into Maritime History project. And it's been wonderful to work with the team, and congratulations to all the team, who I won't name, on putting on this fantastic event, not just today and not just tomorrow, but the talk on SASH that happened last night. Some people were almost in tears to think that in this building of all places, women were finally speaking out about rape. You know, it's wonderful to speak about our bodies and abuse and the wrongs that have happened and how we're working to change that. So what a stupendous day in women's maritime history today. So I'm supposed to be speaking about the value of researching and disseminating in general, but particularly women's maritime history. And of course, it's because perpetuating ignorance, including othering people, not only women, but all sorts of people, is wasteful. I love this picture. It was given to me by one of the first women ferry captains, Sally Foldy in New Zealand. And when she did her autobiography, she got a cartoonist to do some pictures. And I love this cartoon. I don't know if you can read it quite clearly enough, but here is an elderly captain saying, "A woman in a wheelhouse? This is the end of life as we know it." And then the woman in just her casual gear, who's doing the job, says, "He's beginning to warm to the idea." But the point is, the line in the poem, "Give me a baboon to sail with, even a snake would be great. They would both be a vast improvement on a female person as a mate." In talking about women as baboons and others, we are doing a terrible disadvantage to the maritime industry, because we're saying that half the population of the world is not good enough to be in the maritime world, and particularly not in charge. So I'm going to start by saying how far we've come. This little picture of all the books is the collection that Lloyd's Register Foundation has put on, showing some of the books now on women's maritime history. So this is what's out today. Some of the writers of those books are in this room, so do go up and talk to them. And I was thinking, actually, please take this day as an opportunity to make friends with strangers. You know, you are never going to get the chance to meet so many women in maritime history and the making of maritime historiography ever again. So we have made progress. I know we've not made progress, but we have made progress, and this display of books shows it. And of course, it grows out of the diversity, equity, and inclusion movement. So what's researching? It's finding out and naming, including sexual harassment, which leads to seeing meaning, connections, and therefore understanding the bigger picture, identifying the changes that are needed, including respect and changing the hegemonic sexist culture. It's about devising and applying new policies so that we gain better real situations all round. As some of the people who are practitioners in the industry have already said today, a lot of real change is needed. And for me, it's wonderful that Claudine is one of the examples of those changes that have happened in this high position as an engineer and now as president of IMAREST. So researching is an activity that can bring unexpected changes and benefits, including to the very perpetrators of some of the imbalanced cultural behavior that's happening in industries, including maritime. A key way of gathering useful evidence, research is a key way of gathering useful evidence which confirms that being inclusive and fair is a constructive opportunity for all humans and for the maritime industry. And when we're disseminating that research, it's important to commemorate the women who have done wonderful things, including some of the women who'll be watching today from other countries. But it's about being relevantly critical. And we can't afford to write hagiography. We can't afford to just talk about feisty heroines. We have to talk about the battles that some of those women have to fight to get through. And AI images that are coming out at the moment on social media really do not help our case. We need to be seeing pictures of real women who are involved in the real struggle now. So what I'm talking about is what we'll be talking about all day, really: demarginalizing, recentering, and justice. So just to say that understanding the othering process is impactful in every way, this us-them business. I'll define othering, that it's the act of treating someone as though they are not part of a group, in this case, the proper maritime world, and are different in some way and inferior to the main. So this often builds on old ideas. As a historian, looking at 400 years of women at sea, it's been going on for an awful long time, and I don't know why I'm laughing, because it's just tragic, really. Just a tragic waste of human opportunity. So as people have said and will say today, women are about 2% of mariners, yet the sea is 7/10 of the world's surface. So this is a big challenge and a big subject to deal with. It's an imbalance that needs challenging and refuting. And a key word for me in researching is respect too. I want to spend a quiet, important minute thinking about some of the othered people who aren't around to tell us about their achievements, but whose deaths have inspired colleagues to speak out in research. These are two women who have been victims and not survivors of SASH at sea. Sexual assault, sexual harassment. So on the left is Akona Gervasi. Sorry, have I clicked it right? Yeah. Who was raped and then disappeared overboard from her SAF marine ship in 2010. And the debate, did she jump over because the captain had organised her to have a meeting with her alleged rapist at 11 o'clock that morning? So did she jump to avoid all this difficulty, or was she pushed? This is a terrible story that we need to be aware of. And although that was 2010, and although it triggered some action, even more, in this last year, the murder of super yacht stewardess Paige Bell is important too. So she was assaulted by, apparently, he's on trial now, by an engineer on the ship, and then murdered just before her 21st birthday. So can we just have a minute to respect these women, and feel sad and angry at what has happened to them and what we hope will never happen again. And that's what we're working for today, really, that this will never happen again. I say this as somebody who's been researching other maritime people for a long time. I come from a Liverpool transport family, and I got very annoyed at the stories that excluded women. And I kept saying, as a little girl, but why? Why was maritime life like this for women? And therefore, what does that mean about our society, about the men who treat them that way? I did a lot of academic work on these subjects, but also at the time I was doing it, in the mid-70s, there were liberation movements emerging, including the women's liberation movement. So I was very much aware that change was needed and that we, human beings, were working together to achieve that change, despite some heavy odds, which we are still facing today. I've done some lecturing on cruise ships, which gave me a bit of knowledge about seafaring, but I never actually wanted to be a seafarer. I have tried on the jackets of an enormous number of women seafarers. Claudine, I haven't tried on your jacket yet, but I have tried on the jackets of women captains and women engineers particularly, you know, because I'm that sort of historian. As Lucy Worsley says, there's two sorts of historians, those who jump into a costume at the drop of a hat and those who sit and read books. So I've jumped into costumes and I've realized what a huge job it is to be a woman at the tops in maritime history. Sarah is showing me that I haven't got enough time. So today, one of the things we're doing is we're launching this book, which I did, and which is a re-edition of a book I did in 2016. Oh, thank you. I hope it's really useful. When I was doing the re-edition, I thought, gosh, this woman knows a lot. How did she find that out? I'm going to really zoom through these now. I'd like to tell you a story. One of the things I'm doing with this project is that I'm interviewing women seafarers that are going to be put on the website for Rewriting Women in Maritime History. This is somebody I've interviewed. Fiona is really interesting. She was in housekeeping. She went up on the bridge one day and saw what it was like to be a deck officer. She thought, I want to be one of these. She became a cadet. She did it. She was on an LNG carrier in 2012 on the bridge and had been recently trained, so her ideas were very sharp. The crew and the captain didn't believe that the two approaching vessels were pirates and that they would attack such a low-value ship. The attitude to her generally was, she's just a female officer who's here anyway to tick a box. The captain, Fiona said, was very blasé, thought I was being ridiculous. Then he looked out and saw what was happening for himself. He actually lost a little bit of control. He wasn't giving orders. He was just almost numb, frozen. So I had to come in there and take action. She issued orders. She had them in her head because she'd just finished training, and she's a very alert, conscientious person. She issued orders. They were followed. By zigzagging, they succeeded in preventing the pirates boarding. But everybody on the ship had been at risk of death, and she, the only woman, had been at risk of rape, because the idea was that a woman couldn't know that this was a serious situation, and these were the actions that needed to be taken to avoid the pirates. I'm really going to zoom now. I want to just mention 3 truisms that need questioning. Knowledge helps us learn from past mistakes. It doesn't always. I wish it did, but here we are with Trump. A lot of times, modern people have said to me, if you can't see it, you can't be it. But I say, oh yes, you can, because so many people in engineering have said to me that they'd never heard of Victoria Drummond, the first woman engineer. And here's a woman called Arlene Cameron outside the Drummond building at Warsash. But nobody there knew that the Drummond that the building was called after was Victoria Drummond, the first woman engineer. So we can be it even if we can't see it, amazingly. So yeah, research helps, but also determination does too. And also, forearmed is forewarned, forewarned, not necessarily, because it's incredible the way we human beings, including me, absolutely disregard inconvenient knowledge. So when we're researching, we really need to look very hard at all the things we're intuiting as well as working on the obvious things. There are obstacles to doing research on women's maritime history, as there are obstacles to research generally. It's particularly hit women, and I'm not going to have time to tell you a story about how I managed to do a year's research on the National Union of Seamen Archive. Well, I will tell you. Actually, I cooked my way. I asked around the university who would like to be cooked for every day in return for giving me a bed. And a woman who was working in the car industry department said yes. So we had tea together while I did this research. So the motor industry has funded some of my work, and people's generosity. Some of the changes, people ask me a lot, has it changed? Has it got better? Has it got worse? So it has got better. Over the last 100 years, and over the last 50 years particularly, it has got better, but it hasn't got better enough. Certainly, I now see women as feeling they have the right to try, and important aspects of things that enable this are the organisations that exist, including WISTA, terrifically important. Slightly better access to training, better workplace conditions, all credit to Nautilus, the union, who in 2010 did what I think is the first research on SASH at sea. And the solidarity and the network and the social media and the visibility have been really important in saying, these are women, this is what they do, this is what they can do. So we've got a lot going for us. Interest is still being generated. This is something that's just happening to me at the moment. I'm talking to the family of one of the first naval doctors, actually. And this is a picture of a cartoon from Giles, who was in the Daily Express, showing how men's attitudes to being treated by a woman doctor, because she was blonde and her legs were visible, they all got illnesses suddenly. They all wanted to see her. But, you know, one of the wonderful things that's happening in history since the 1970s is oral history, people telling stories, people telling family stories. So that's one of the things we've got going for us, willingness and sharing. Social media helps, including YouTube. Genuine support for DEI, not just box ticking. The high numbers of women in the maritime industry, even though they're not high enough, it's important because the knowledge we produce, all the great reports that have been published in the last 10 years, make us look valid. You know, there really is proof of exactly what's going on for women. And people speaking out, as Anne Pleshka and Mark did yesterday about SASH in this place, is very important. And also, I think because there's so much more gender awareness now, researchers in power are asking questions, including about the role of testosterone, the uselessness of chivalry because it's sexist, and the various portals that women are getting through. So at long last, there's no taking of old values for granted. So we have come a long way. And also we now have the headspace to think about this as never before. So don't clap me, let's clap all the women who've achieved what they did and keep on keeping on. Let's clap all the women who helped them in the background, including male allies. And let's clap all the chroniclers, including those here today, who publicise this evidence, this research that they've done. Thank you.
Thank Thank you very much, Jo. Always really enlightening, and I'm sure there's lots of people who are dying to speak to you during the lunchtime as well. I'd like to invite Dr. Helen Doe up now, please, who's going to moderate our panel session and introduce the speakers taking part in that. And we're going to be very strict on the 10 minutes introductions that we've asked you to do, so please do listen to Helen when she moves you on. Thank you. Helen.
Right, well, it's been a wonderful start, thank you, everybody. And I've got a mic on. I have a mic on, thank you, Jo. I'm tuned in. Okay. Thanks for the help.
I can't hear you, that's all. I can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
I can't hear you through my system.
Ah.
Yes.
Thank you, Jo. Right, so thank you for a great start to the morning, and I'm really pleased to be moderating this session. We've got three wonderful speakers, and if we could ask the first one to step up, then afterwards we'll be sitting here and we'll get a chance to ask some questions and hear more. Anyway, if I could ask the first person to come up, which is Dr. Nina Baker, who I had the great pleasure of meeting for the first time today. We've known each other a long time, but we've met for the first time physically. So Nina, thank you.
My name's Dr. Nina Baker. I describe myself as an independent engineering historian. This is the cover of my new book, Supposed Killed or Drowned by Enemy Action at Sea, Scottish Merchant Navy Women Who Died as a Result of Enemy Action in the two World Wars. Now, you may reasonably wonder why I have chosen to write and self-publish such a very niche topic. Well, this is me 50 years ago. I'm an absolute dinosaur. This was me when I was a third mate, a deck officer on a BP tanker, the 118,000-ton crude oil carrier, the British Progress. And this is Merchant Navy Memorial Day in Glasgow in George Square. Now, I instigated this event back in 2014 when I was then a city councillor, and it has grown to include all the Merchant Navy cadets from the local nautical college, several hundred of them. And each year, 2 cadets read out a selection of men and women's names from the Merchant Navy Roll of Honour books. And I got to wondering who those people might be. Here is the National Merchant Navy Memorial at Tower Hill, just down the road, which was built after the First World War and added to after the Second. Also the Scottish Merchant Navy Memorial, which is at Leith Docks, erected in 2010. And for Glasgow, our memorial is a set of the Roll of Honour books, which is a book version of the names that are on the Tower Hill Memorial, and also a plaque at Govan. This slide shows the table from my book listing all 56 Merchant Navy seafarers who died in the First World War. About 45,000 Royal Navy people died, 17,000 Merchant Navy died in that war. And this is the table of the 36 women seafarers who died in the Second World War, when even more Royal Navy and Merchant Navy died. And because I live in Scotland, for my book, I chose to focus on finding out about the Scottish women who died. This is the Anchor Line ship, the Athenia, which sailed between Glasgow and Montreal. She was attacked mere hours after the declaration of the Second World War on the 3rd of September, 1939. She was sunk by U-boat U-30, some 60 miles south of Rockall. Of a total of 1,418 people on board, 98 passengers and 19 crew were lost. Of those 19, 10 were stewards and 4 were stewardesses, including 4 Glasgow women, Baird, Harrower, Johnston and Lawler. And I'll come back to the disproportionate loss of ship's hotel staff later. This is Dr. Stewardess Margaret Johnson. She was born in Springburn and began her Merchant Navy career in 1925. She sailed on the Letitia and the Athenia, and her home at the time of her death was a tenement close on Cathcart Road, just down the road from where I live in South Glasgow. This is Stewardess Mrs. Jessie Lawler. She was born in Tobermory, but at the time she died, She was living in a tenement close in Govan, near the shipyards. She was married to a foundry worker, and like most of the women in the book, she was from the working classes. And I said why I would explain why there are so many stewardesses died when their ships went down. These are the deck plans from the Athenia. The red arrow shows that the stewardess's accommodation was in the midst of the first-class cabins, but they might have been responsible for passengers on any of the many lower decks, and when the emergency alarm sounded, their duty was to go down into the ship and make sure their passengers had clothes and life jackets so that they could get out safely. These are the Athenia memorials in London, Govan, and Canada. Scotswoman Hannah Baird is included in the Canadian one because that was her last known address at the time of her death. And the Govan plaque, top right, was recently discovered in a church attic and remembers Alison Harrower. These are the maps on the left is where the Athenia was attacked, and the image on the right is from a news report in 2017 when deep-sea searchers believe they located the wreck. And considering how far out into the Atlantic she was sunk, it's amazing how many were actually rescued. The second ship I want to talk about is the Alicia, another anchor line ship, but running between Glasgow and Bombay, or Mumbai as we know it now. She was attacked 350 miles east-northeast of Durban, and she had actually been attacked 4 times in the First World War, but was finally sunk in 1942. These are the Japanese armed merchant cruisers, the Ikoku Maru and the Hokoku Maru, that sunk the Alicia. They had both originally been built as luxury passenger cargo ships, in a way a bit like the Alicia herself, except that they were designed for quick conversion to military use. Nurse stewardess Catherine McWatt Armstrong was one of 22 who died when the ship sank. Aged 59, she had been at sea for 20 years, and her last known address was also in Govan, also working class area, and on her final trip, she was the only woman on board. We have no photo of her, but it seems that her nickname was Mashie, and we do have this charming pen portrait written by the ship's radio officer. She was middle-aged and dumpy with little fat legs, and she wore thick-lensed, steel-rimmed spectacles. Mashie was a Scotswoman, but not dour by any means. But she was blunt of speech and saw no reason to smile unless there was for no purpose. But when there was a reason, her smile was good to see. It was reported that she stayed behind in the sinking ship to help the surgeon tend to the wounded. They were the last to leave the torpedoed ship as it made its final plunge. The lifeboat was never seen again, and this is her death record card. She was posthumously awarded the Merchant Navy Commendation, the equivalent of military mention in dispatches, for her courage and attention to duty, and her family would have been entitled to claim the other usual war service medals as well. Now, we were asked to consider some of the sources. These are some of the sources I use. This kind of research is inevitably iterative, going backwards and forwards, but I'm particularly indebted to Dr. Ben Stock, who does archive work for the Merchant Navy Association and who has access to a vast number of privately held survivor accounts. The organisers of today's events asked us to think about what might assist future researchers, and these are some of my thoughts which we might discuss in the panel session. I'm especially keen that we find ways to record the mundane experiences of women at sea. What did you eat? What was your accommodation like? What did you wear? What was the social life like? Also to record the experiences and opinions of the unexceptional women, not the stars who reached the top, but also those in the lower and middle levels, and even those who disappeared for whatever reason. There are more profiles of women like this, so Scottish women seafarers, and complete lists of all such women lost in the 2 wars. I'm not selling the book here, but you can take a look at the copy, which I've left outside in the refreshment area after the talks.
Thank you, Nina. Several things to think about there. Now, I'm looking forward to hearing from Erica. Thank you, Professor Erica Mazzoli from Italy.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you very much to the organizers for inviting me to participate in the celebration of the International Day for Women in Maritime, hosted by the Lloyd's Register Foundation under these wonderful Liberty frescoes. Today I'm going to present Mermaids in History, engendering maritime labor and business history, 18th century, 19th century, 20th century, a collective volume I had the privilege to edit, and which has been just published by Brill in 2026. As you can imagine, the title of the volume is, of course, deliberately provocative. When we think of maritime history, we usually imagine ships, sailors, captains, ports, commerce, perhaps storms and oceans. We imagine movement, risk, and long-distance connections. But we also tend to imagine a world that is overwhelmingly male. So, in this sense, Mermaids in History starts from a rather simple question. What happens if we look again? What happens if we shift our attention from the ship alone to the wider maritime world? From the deck to the shore, from heroic narratives to everyday life, and from institution to labor, families, and communities? And perhaps most importantly, what happens when women stop appearing as marginal or mythological figures in maritime history and instead become central historical actors? The Mermaids volume argues that women were never absent from maritime life. Rather, they were often absent from maritime history. But this is a problem. This is not a problem of women, it's a problem of historiography, actually. Its chapters investigate women working in ports, coastal economies, fishing communities, commercial activities, and maritime households. Some work directly in fish processing and maritime industries. Other trade, organize informal economies, managed family businesses, or sustained households in a context shaped by mobility, migration, and the long absences of men at sea. In many maritime communities, women occupied positions that were indispensable but rarely recognized as such. Ships sailed because much of the labor sustaining maritime life happened elsewhere, on quays, in warehouses, markets, workshops, homes, and coastal spaces. The volume, therefore, invites us to rethink what we mean by maritime life itself. If we define maritime history solely in terms of ships and navigation, women inevitably remain peripheral. But if we understand maritime words, saying it with Campling and Colas, as a terraqueous predicament, so as a system connecting sea and shore, movement and permanence, mobility and care, women suddenly become impossible to ignore. Like many collective scholarly endeavors, Mermaid in History did not emerge overnight. It is the result of a longer intellectual journey that unfolded over several years and across different institutions. Two European-founded research projects played an essential role in making this volume possible. The first was the Marie Curie project We Can It, hosted by the University of Ljubljana, which focused on women's labor and maritime sectors and encouraged new ways of thinking about gender, mobility, and economic participation. And the second was the Next Generation EU project Ondine, hosted by the University of Rome Tor Vergata, which expanded this perspective by exploring everyday life in maritime communities and by bringing historical experiences into conversation with broader social and economic transformations. Well, these projects did much more than provide funding. They create the opportunity, the networks, and the intellectual space necessary to ask different questions. Questions about labor that often remain invisible, about women whose experiences were fragmented in the archives, and about maritime lives in the unfolded beyond the ship itself. But perhaps the most important aspect of this journey was not institutional, it was human, of course. Mermaids in history emerge primarily through encounters. Over the years, workshops organized within the Weekend and the Undine projects brought together historians, maritime scholars, social scientists, and researchers working across different countries, historical periods, and disciplines. Those encounters matter enormously. Because writing women into maritime history is not simply about adding forgotten names to an existing narrative. It requires changing the kinds of questions we ask, the source we use, and the assumption we bring to the maritime past. In many traditional archives of maritime history, such as shipping registers, naval records, business documentation, women often appear only faintly, if at all. And yet, if we broaden our perspective and look differently, women suddenly emerge everywhere in commercial correspondence, account books, photographs, court case, oral memories, family strategies, and informal economies. In other words, the challenge was not simply to find women. The challenge was learning how to see them. One of the central ideas of the volume is that maritime life has never happened only at sea. It has always depended on a constant relationship between sea and shore. And this brings us to the second kind of encounter that shaped maritime history. The encounter with the scholarship of those who had already began the important task of bringing women back into maritime history. From this scholarship, and here today we have personalities such as Jo and Ellen. From this scholarship, we learned something essential. Shore was never passive. Women's labor on land was essential to maritime economies. Processing fish, managing households during long absences, maintaining commercial networks, organizing markets, providing care, sustaining communities, and absorbing and amortizing all the socioeconomic uncertainty typical of maritime economies. So, as already highlighted by Elpi in her talk, without this labor, maritime economies simply could not function. So, recognizing this does not mean romanticizing the past. Maritime life was often marked by inequality, hardship, and exclusion. Women's participation in maritime economies could create opportunities, of course, but also vulnerabilities. Still, women were not merely passive observers of maritime change. They were workers, organizers, negotiators, and economic actors navigating complex and often difficult circumstances. And perhaps this is where the volume speaks most directly to today's event. When we celebrate women's progress in maritime life, we often think in terms of access. Women entering profession and spaces from which they were previously excluded. And of course, that progress matters enormously. But history also reminds us of something else, actually. Women are not newcomers in maritime worlds. They have always been there, always, okay? So, sometimes visible, but more often invisible. Sometimes recognized, but very often overlooked. In short, the collective volume Mermaids in History is in many ways an invitation to look again, okay? And to recognize that the history of maritime life has always been richer, more complex, and more gendered than we can imagine. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Erica. It's good to see something on the shore-based aspect now as well. Right, could we now have Shada? Another aspect of it. Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for having me here. I'm Shraddha Singhania. I have more than 2 decades of experience in maritime industry. My work currently sits at the intersection of industry practice and research. I have worked with largest Indian shipping company, the Shipping Corporation of India. After that, I worked with Dubai Ports as ports and terminal in Mumbai. In year 2022, I started my own consultancy. I work closely with shipping companies, a lot of freight forwarding companies, and the startups in maritime. I'm an active member of Vista India, many other forums which represent women. I have authored a history book for Mumbai Port, which is about 150 years of rich history, how Mumbai Port has contributed to Indian maritime industry. My association with LRF, I'm a small part of the larger effort that has been put up by LRF towards rewriting maritime history. And through this work, I see myself looking at these 2 questions more closely. In many ways, both these questions lead us to the same reality. When we look at India's maritime past, it is deeply rich and well established. In my book, I have documented references to maritime trade dating back to 2400 BCE, including Lothal in India, home to one of the world's earliest known dockyards. The narrative traced so far from Harka Bai Mariam ul Zamani in the late 15th and 16th century to Sumati Morarji shaping global shipping in 1930s to 40s, and Anna Rajam emerging within governance structures in the 1950s appear across vast historical gaps rather than part of the continuous documented history. Looking at such ancient and expansive maritime history or legacy, the question is not whether women were present, but why they were not visible the way history has been documented so far. Let us dive a little deeper. Women's contribution to maritime is far more diverse than the sector is usually understood to be. And the work I have done so far is proof of that. The women documented across these narratives span trade, ports, sustainability, defense, labor, leadership, and coastal livelihood. Together, these stories challenge the narrow lens through which maritime history is often viewed. It is also important to know this is not one archive. The work does not sit neatly in one place. It emerges from fragments, documents, memories, lived experience. When researching pre-independence maritime history in India, an important reality emerges. A significant portion of structured documentation, particularly from the British and Portuguese era, was recorded and preserved through colonial administrative system. As a result, valuable archival material is often found not only in India but in the UK, such as Oxford, Cambridge, and National Museum of Royal Navy and other institutions. Now, this does not diminish Indian records. Rather, it expands the research landscape. It means that to build a fuller and more accurate profile, one often has to work across geographies, connecting archives held in different parts of the world. And there are some methods from my experience I would like to share here. These are some of the pathways I followed to understand maritime history more deeply. Over time, the research begins to train your eye to notice patterns, fragments, and overlooked clues, which is why oral histories have become foundational. Today, as we speak with first women or pioneers of the industry, these conversations are not merely reflections. They are becoming archives for the future. And if I were to bring this approach into one line, I would say, listen, trace, connect, validate, document, and repeat. You've got to put in the hard yards. Every detail must be verified from multiple and reliable sources, especially when we talk about digital records. Research today is no more confined to physical archives. Digital records, online data, even social media have become powerful tools. Communities are sharing memories, images, documents, and these are becoming part of the evolving archive. Let's move on to the narratives. I'm keen to share the pattern and the findings from my collectibles. Yes. Diverse, first and only. The women profile come from very different generations, spaces, regions. The presence of so many firsts exposes how long these spaces remain closed. Let's look at it more closely. One of the strongest patterns these narratives is the nature of beginning, often difficult, uncertain, and without precedent. Bias was persistent, built strongly into structures of entry and expectations. Biases came in various forms, be it sea or shore job. Almost all women covered through the narratives have faced the biases. Silver lining is, almost every woman, every journey had at least one person, either father, mother, teacher, manager, captain, or spouse, who believed in them before the system did, bridging the gap between aspirations and access. And what followed is endurance. Reshma Nilofer, who's first and only marine pilot in India, says a man can be average and still belong. A woman has to be exceptional just to be accepted. And that reality comes through strongly across these narratives. Competence alone was often not enough. Women were expected to demonstrate endurance, resilience, and emotional strength. Now, this also brings us the focus on human cost, risk, fatigue, isolation, and constant balancing of personal and professional pressures, reminding us that every achievement lies a far more complex and demanding reality. And yet, despite these challenges, there's a clear and encouraging shift. The effort has not just sustained, but it has transformed. Many women did not remain confined to one role. They moved across phases of maritime life, from sea to shore, from operations to policy, from technical roles to leadership and institution building. What this reveals is a deeper change. Women are no longer only navigating existing systems, they are shaping the new ones. One of the important findings is that the tone of the narratives is marked more by duty than by self-celebration. And let's have a look at 22 voices, but one narrative.
Indian queen who built a maritime And so, I walked into a space that had no blueprint for me.
A space that I learned to read the tides. I struggled, but I stayed.
Stay, not just to belong, but to command.
Yes, to command, to navigate, and to show how it's done.
And in doing so, we open doors for those who would come after us.
Write their story and create space for more women.
Space that is safe and good. Space that is ready for the change.
Change that inspires generation.
That builds a better and sustainable system.
System that improves both.
And moves the needle forward.
So, we are no longer exception.
But part of the journey, shaping what comes next across the ocean.
It's not only across oceans, but across roads and across generations.
And together, we are rewriting maritime history.
So the narratives gathered so far represent only a fraction of much larger, still unwritten maritime history. And as I come towards the end of the presentation, I must say that it truly takes tribe to bring the right people together and create a community. Thank you, Louis, thank you, Sarah, Grace, Joe, and entire LRF team for making this possible. I want to thank more, but I know I need to rush. But thank you, everyone. Thanks for this.
Thank you, and I loved the video. That was wonderful. Right, I'm now going to ask our three speakers if they'd come and sit up here, please, so we get a chance to ask some questions. We've got 10 minutes, but if the three speakers could be here, I'll stay here, if that's all right. And, right, shall we start off to see if there's any questions from the audience at the beginning? Joe.
Thank you. Shradner said absence is a signal.
Can I repeat that?
Yes.
Shradner said that absence is a signal.
Sorry, I was being Mike. I'm thinking about the way we human beings self-gaslight. So how can we help ourselves talk about these absences that are such important signals?
Joe, this is a very, very, very interesting and difficult question to answer. Yes, there is a problem with women in archival and traditional archival records. So women often missing there. However, men are always reported. Always. And from my experience, according to my experience, those records always provides information of what kind of relationship men entertain with women. So this dimension of gender relation could be very telling with respect of the role of women in the maritime industry and to understand why we don't have specific references of women in the records.
Okay, all right.
I'm sorry, I think I missed a question.
Sorry, you missed her?
Sorry, I think...
That's right.
Erica, were you asking me something? I didn't hear the question.
No, she was just...
Okay.
No, she wasn't. Sorry, the hearing loop isn't working on the other microphones, is it? But I can repeat that, yeah. Any other questions? I've got a few questions as well from the audience. Well, lady at the back there, thank you.
Firstly, thank you very much. All three of you were very interesting to listen to about your journeys through how you looked into the history of women in the maritime industry. I'm just interested to know, I looked around this room earlier, and the one thing that I really noticed in talking about women in maritime is we're all women. apart from one, I'm afraid. Two. Do you think there is an issue with the lack of men that are interested in women in maritime? Is there an issue with how to find out the history of women in maritime and how we take it forward into the future with the support of male allies when they don't attend events like this and really understand the issues that we're facing?
Nina, do you want to kick off on that one?
Yes, this is a largely female environment, but when I think of other fields of women's history that I go to, I see a much more mixed room with plenty of men taking part. So whether that's a feature of this topic, I'm not an academic, so I don't really know. But I was struck by this beautiful room. 3 men's names above me. Watt, Newton and Cook, all undoubtedly amazing people. And how hard it would be to change the space in which we sit. And then I was thinking about the amazing example taking place in Paris now, where they are adding women's names to the Eiffel Tower alongside the men's names that were on it from the get-go. I'm wondering if there's something we can do about the routine spaces, the quotidian experience of going places of importance, where you might happen upon accidentally some interesting women's stories.
Thank you, Nina. Charlotte, do you want to add something to that?
Yeah, sure. As I mentioned, the oral histories or the oral narratives, what we get have become foundational now. It's so important to speak to people to understand, like what I have done back home in India is I speak to the veterans from the industry. I understand, while it's not very common for them to speak about women, but our questions need to be very targeted, direct questions wherein we ask, was there any woman present around that time? What was she doing? Was she just helping around? And even if you have a one-liner coming from them, I think that is the clue that one has to take and take it forward. You have to look at multiple sources, as I mentioned in my presentation. It is so scattered right now. It is, and that is where the whole idea is that we bring it together, we bring it under one roof so that the future generation can once again view it as a history and we become integral part of it. Thank you.
Thanks, Charlotte. Lady down here. Yes. Sorry, who's the next person?
Oh, sorry. I didn't know you were looking at me.
Louise, apologies.
Thank you. I just wondered, and I extend this question to Helen as well, because I know in your Enterprising Women in Shipping and various other researches you've stumbled across women in your research. What's the most surprising or unusual place that you've found a woman while you've been researching?
You ask everybody? Right? Where's the most unusual place that you've found when you've been researching? Is that in terms of the archive or the role they were fulfilling?
Well, I guess maybe you were off out looking for something else and they popped up, or equally the role, yeah.
Serendipity is very good. What was the most unusual?
May I add something here? Yeah. So, as I said, the narrow lens is mainly when we look at women's contribution in maritime. I was looking at seafarers. I was only looking at women who were part of the deck or engine side and all. And that's when I came across this lady, Rekha, who's the first fisherwoman in India who has license to go deep sea for fishing. Again, we are talking about conventional livelihoods, the coastal livelihoods, but I was not looking for Rekha, I was looking for, and that's the reason I'm saying that lens is narrow, we need to widen it, we need to see maritime as a whole ecosystem, and I would say that was one of the things that found accidentally, but yes, she has been documented well. Yeah, thank you.
One thing that I noticed regarding archives and official records is, at least for my case, is that the most I go back in time, the most evidence of presence of women in maritimes I can find, as for example, ship owners, merchants, traders, etc. The more we approach the present days, it becomes more difficult to find information regarding women's activities of women in maritime economies. It may looks like a paradox, but it's not actually. It would be a very long and complex discussion to deal with. But I think that we have to take into consideration also the period of time we choose to explore. So at least for my case, for the Mediterranean basin, we found more information of women in early modern period than in modern times.
That's interesting.
For example.
Nina, you got an example?
Well, I did some work for the LRF 2 or 3 years ago, which resulted in a blog about women in rope making. And that came about because a friend of mine had arranged to take me on a visit to one of the 2 shipyards on the Clyde. And we were standing around outside the gate while we were waiting for security to let us through. And he waved his hand up at a building outside the gates and said, "Oh, that used to be a rope works. My granny worked there." I knew nothing about rope work. I had no idea women had ever been involved in it. And the more I looked, the more I discovered that the very minute and second that any mechanization came into rope making, it flipped almost overnight from an entirely male environment to a 95% female environment. And it was really interesting to look into that, and I even found some memories of local women on Clydeside who'd done that sort of work. I had no idea.
When I was doing my research, the thing that in that particular I found was, it started off because I discovered that my great-grandmother ran a shipbuilding yard.
Wow.
And I thought, it was a woman in charge of a shipbuilding yard, and she was there as a shipbuilder. And that's what inspired me.
Amazing.
That was the unusual piece. That's what inspired me and continued. And if I can just add something about women generally, women at sea, women on shore. The more women we have in senior places in maritime industry at shore, the more we can have more women in places at sea. We need them both to work together. That's my assessment. Oh, we had a question from here. Yes.
Hello, can you hear me okay? That was fantastic, thank you so much. I wanted to ask another question about different elements of engagement with women and history and legacies of maritime life in the past and present. And I'm a historian at the University of Bristol. I'd like to know more about what you think the role of higher education is in terms of engaging students or the broader public.
Anyone want to take that one on?
Not my field. However, I can see a pal lurking at the back, Anne, wakey. Anne has done everything, working at sea, higher education, lower education, in between education. She's the one to ask, I don't know.
So what are you looking for? How can we encourage more through education?
I'm thinking particularly about history when it comes to whether that's the student dissertations or the courses that are given, what kind of framing device can you use to bring them in?
I think there's a limit in terms of where that comes through. There doesn't seem to be. You're nodding a lot. You're agreeing with me, are you?
Yeah. I agree with you.
It just seems to be invisible, isn't it? I think it's a really good point, but I think we need to encourage that more, don't we?
Yeah. Oh well. The problem with higher education is so dense and so structured that it's difficult to intersect with this kind of topic. I think that we have to intersect this big issue with the specific situation of every university or courses or national environment in which we operate. So but in Bristol, why are you asking that? So I mean in Bristol there is a lot of tradition of higher education regarding maritime heritage experiences.
Yeah, I'm just curious because there's some really interesting discussion about engagement with history, obviously what is the teaching for students. So I was just curious to hear your perspective as well, because obviously most of them have worked so far on that. I don't know what you think.
So in India, maritime education has taken a bigger shape now. We have a lot of institutions which have introduced maritime as a subject, and there are specific courses available which are very specifically about areas in maritime. So we have IMU, we have other institutions run by DG Shipping and other shipping companies which are training the new generation and telling them more about it. We believe to do it at grassroots level. So what we have started doing is the primary education is where people or the kids would need to know about. There is an industry called maritime, and not that everybody has access to the coastal side, and even people who are living near coastal side, even they are not aware of maritime as a career choice. There's a lot of awareness, and now that is happening through the programs that are run by the government. And today the ministry is running a lot of programs at the universities whereby people are taking keen interest in maritime industry. If we look at the numbers, there's a great shift in terms of the numbers. From 1 to 2%, we have moved to 13 to 14% overall maritime education we are talking about. So that's where we are.
Good. Thank you.
I hope that answers your question.
That's helped. Good. Well, thank you very much, everybody. And I want to thank very much Shraddha, Erica, and Nina for a very interesting session. Thank you very much.
I think it's been wonderful and so very interesting to hear all those perspectives. I'm sure the conversations will carry on over lunch. For the people online, we've got people joining us from all around the UK, from Liverpool, from Greenwich, East Yorkshire, South Wales. Hello to all of you, and even further afield in Western Australia, Nairobi in Kenya. We've got people dialing in from Bangladesh and from Germany. So hello to everyone online, and thank you for staying with us. We're going to break now for lunch, and we'll resume in about 55 minutes at 2 o'clock UK time. So we'll see you all back here at 2 o'clock. Thank you, everybody.